Hi, everyone. My name is Joanna Burkhardt. I'm the Collection Development Librarian at the University of Rhode Island, and I will be moderating this session, The Power of Our Stories. This panel highlights memoirs rooted in resilience, family history, and self-reflection, underscoring the transformative power of personal narrative. Our panelists today are Asale, Angel-Ajani, Fugitive Archives, My Family and the American Myth of Belonging. The next panelist is Reyna Grande, and her book is Migrant Heart. Lauren Hough, Monster of a Land. Riad Sattouf, The End of the Arab of the Future. Riad isn't available to join us today, but we'll play a little video to let him tell you about his book a little bit later on. And finally, Chris Young, The Wound is Where the Light Enters. We have a limited amount of time today, so I'd like to get directly to our first question. If everyone would please give me a 1-minute synopsis of your book. I know that's a hard question. Did you write your book with a specific audience in mind, and who did you most want to reach with your story? Let's start with Lauren.
Hi. Yeah, the 1-minute synopsis is always, it's fun for all of us. Probably takes longer than writing the book.
Mhm.
It's a road trip book. It's a road trip book. I'd been sort of chased by travels with Charlie for a long time. When you're a writer and you have a dog and you do a lot of travel, people keep giving you that book. And I was terrified to finish it because every time I read a book with a dog, the dog dies. Um, and I just didn't. I was reading it at once while one of my dogs was passing away, and I put it down. I couldn't finish it just in case. I couldn't deal with two of them at the same time. But it's a book for I yeah, I'd always wanted to do that road trip to circle the country with, a dog, and it felt like when you're stuck in, the kind of jobs I had, construction and cable guy and bartender, the idea of having a van or a vehicle and just being able to go with no destination and no time limit it's everything I would dream about and fantasize about when I, couldn't sleep at night. So I found myself with time on my hands, and at some point finally clicked in my head that this was my job to maybe find a story. So I had a van and I had a dog, and we circled the country.
Excellent. Thank you. Chris, how about you?
My book is about a young man that by the age of 22 had experienced everything extreme poverty could bring his way, from murder, suicide, no electricity, no running water, to incarceration. That young man was me, and I'm blessed to be sitting in front of you free. At 22 years old, I was arrested by the Federal Bureau of Investigations and the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, and ultimately sentenced to 2 life without parole sentences. And I started this book 9.5, right at 10 years into that prison sentence. I was in solitary confinement because my lawyer, Brittany K. Barnett, won a very rare post-conviction argument, and it got my sentence reduced from life to 14 years. And they had put me in solitary confinement. And during that time, I said I wanted to write a book. I wanted to tell everybody what I had been through in hopes of breaking stereotypes and shifting the paradigm. Hoping young men like myself would realize that they don't have to engage in the things that they're taught to engage in, the things that they're exposed to, and hoping that I could break the stereotypes that the powers that be embrace that lead to incorrect assumptions about people. And so I'm hoping that this book shows people that enlightenment can come from the very pain that is crippling.
Thank you, Chris. Reyna?
Hey everyone, I'm so happy to be here with you today. So my book, Migrant Heart, Essays About Things I Can't Forget, is a memoir, and this is my third memoir. One of my favorite writers, Sandra Cisneros, says, "Don't write what you remember, write about the things you wish you could forget." And that is great advice that I feel I have really put to use in my writing. I tend to write about the things I wish I could forget. And these are moments in my life that have been very painful, very traumatic. I write a lot about my immigrant experience, about family separation. You know, my father and my mother both came to the United States when I was a little girl, and they left me behind for many years in Mexico. And I crossed the border when I was 9 years old, and I grew up undocumented in the US. So I read a lot about that experience. And one of the things I wanted to do with Migrant Heart was to revisit those moments that I wish I could forget, but also to understand that these are moments that I shouldn't forget because these are the moments that have shaped me. These are the moments that have made me who I am today. You know, the woman, the wife, the mother, the writer that I am. And I am those things because of all of those experiences. And so, what I try to do in the book was to reflect on all of those moments, to confront the pain of those moments, but ultimately to also make space for the joy. And so these stories that I write about, these essays in the collection, they are very painful stories, but also there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of gratitude, a lot of compassion as well. And so for me, writing this book, I really wanted to, you know, inspire other people who are also walking around with a lot of moments that they wish they could forget. And I want to encourage them to reflect on those moments, to confront the pain, but also to make space for the joy. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Asale?
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me. I would say that my book, which is called Fugitive Archives, I haven't quite remembered the subtitle yet, is surprisingly about my family, who everyone in my family would be surprised to know that I've actually written a book roughly about them because we see ourselves as being very beyond, I mean, less than ordinary. But as I sat down to kind of think about, as Reyna was talking about, things that I couldn't forget, I understood that my lineage, my family, like all of our families, have are rooted in stories and rooted in stories about terror, basically. My lineage is directly tied to histories of violence. And so I wanted to think through not just how my individual story of various people in my life, from my great-grandmother who was a member of the KKK to my sixth great-grandfather who was enslaved and murdered by white folks who enslaved him for gold, to my cousins who were terrorized and moved off their lands as Eastern Band Cherokee folks, and how all of that is tied to this broader story of the American myth of who we are, right? So because I come from a very working class, Black, brown, poor white folks, I think that we see ourselves as being just kind of cogs in the wheel. We just sort of get on with the day. We go to work. We're the kind of people who maybe we grumble, complain to each other, but we don't really see ourselves as being able to kind of shift, or that we kind of have an ambivalent relationship to this broader American place that we're supposed to be part of, but see ourselves as being very much outside of for a variety of different reasons. My father was also incarcerated, and my mother was too, and they would never see themselves as being subjects of any story, right? Much less they wouldn't see themselves as being connected to broader histories, which is part of what this book tries to do, is sort of goes through the lineage, but connects all of their stories to these other things that were going on in the US, either simultaneously or at different times. So that's my 1 minute synopsis.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to hear from Riad Sattouf, who will tell us more about his book, The End of the Arab of the Future.
Hello, everybody. My name is Riad Sattouf. I'm a French comic book artist, and I'm really happy to present you today my new book published by the legendary Fantagraphics. The title is The End of the Arab of the Future, first volume, and it will be followed by the second volume, and it will be the end of the story of the Arab of the future. The four first part of the story of the Arab of the future had been published by another publisher years ago in the United States, and I'm really happy that the rest of the story could be available in English and in the United States, and really happy that Fantagraphics can publish them. The story is about the kidnapping of my young brother when he was 5 years old, and he was taken to Syria by my father, and the story tells all the struggle that my mother had to. All the difficulties we had to live with this story, and to solve the problem, and to try to get him back in France. So at the end of the fourth volume of The Arab of the Future, the brother was abducted, and at the beginning of the end of The Arab of the Future, he is already in Syria. So it depicts the life in the 90s in France for a teenager. It's an autobiographical story, and I tell my memories with, I hope so, a lot of humor. And I also tell the story how I became a comic book artist, and dealing with this crime that my father did when I was a teen. I was 14 years old when he kidnapped my brother. Now, I won't tell you the end of the story, but there is an end. And the second volume will be published very soon by Fantagraphics also. And I'm very happy to tell you also that Fantagraphics will publish my new series that is already published in France. The title in France is Moi Fadi le frère volé. I, Fadi, the stolen brother, and this version of the story is the point of view of my stolen brothers and his life in Syria. So, hope you are interested in this book. I'm really so happy because on my social media all the day, there's people writing me from all over the world and telling me, oh, we want to read the rest of the story. And so when I announced that the end of my story would be available in English, it was really good news for a lot of people. So I hope you will like my books. See you soon. Thank you.
So we have a really wide variety and diverse collection of stories here, but they all have some very interesting tie-ins with one another. I noticed that after getting through all of them, that there are some common themes throughout. So Lauren, your story was inspired by John Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie. Do the places you visited parallel or replicate his journey? And if not, how did you pick where you would stop?
Um, it did in a way. He started in New York and I started in Austin, so obviously there's that initial problem where I had to get to New York. And that was kind of the problem with the beginning of the book because I'd lived on the East Coast for so long and knew so many people there that all throughout the beginning of the road trip, it felt more like visiting and trying to get to somewhere. And you can't go to Florida without visiting your mom, and you can't go to, this state without my brother lives in Rhode Island and or Massachusetts. So and it wasn't until I kept thinking of it as turning left to cross the top of the country where it started feeling like a road trip where I was finally free to do what I wanted without really an agenda. And I was really just stopping. I stopped in places because it reminded me of a song or because I didn't stop in Port Arthur because I have a beef with Port Arthur because of how they treated Janis Joplin back in the day. Um and I'd always wanted to go to Montana just because I'd read so much about it in books and it was always this I'd read A River Runs Through It and An Impressionable Time. So, but no, it didn't really have too much to do with Steinbeck's journey in the end of it because, I the country's changed so much between now and then. But there was also just these parallels of he had been talking about how there would be a point where you could drive through a state and not know where you were. And and not visit anything that the interstates would shuttle you through. And you really are. You can drive through the interstate in Florida and you could be anywhere or any flat state in the country. Everything is exactly the same at every rest stop. But as soon as you get off the highway, it feels like there are the parts they're trying to hide. There's a stretch of road where I went down where there are 4 prisons within 5 miles of one another. Um, and and it seems like they keep us on the highway in a sense so that we don't see that, so that we don't see the more extreme poverty in Mississippi or any of that. But there's also, you don't meet anyone on the highway. You don't get to talk to anyone. It's not until you pull off and talk to people that you get a feel for where you are and for the country. And that was the most fun part of it is just the random encounters with people, of random people who come up and start talking to you at a gas station or a campsite. And those ended up being, I think, the better parts of the book. Anytime I got into like a fun conversation with someone, like a vagabond that walked up to my campsite, he called himself a vagabond in Minnesota or Wisconsin, and he was heading up to Canada. And all these people who have sort of dropped out of society really to live in vans and travel and um yeah, I didn't so much have an agenda except that we needed to we had to keep moving at some point. I needed to make it back to Austin.
Okay, thank you. Chris, you and your brother pretty much raised yourselves from a very young age. You had to rely on the local community to simply get enough to eat. Yet your recollections from that time seem almost nostalgic. How do you feel when you look back at your childhood?
I feel ambivalent. It's a mixture of emotions. I believe duality exists in reality, that, joy and pain is like sunshine and rain, that both of them coexist to give you that perfect balance. I just happen to have a lot of the negative and the bad in the early years, and now I have a lot of the good. But I found good even in those early years when it was bad, because a lot of things that people call good or bad is only relative. It's just you comparing it to something else. So I didn't have that subjectivity to compare my life to, because everybody around me was poor. Everybody around me was living bad. So a lot of the things that was bad didn't seem too bad. It was just the extremes. That's when I really was able to recognize, be like, oh, this is not what's up. This ain't how it's supposed to be. And so when I reflect, it's nostalgic because at that time, I really was connected to the few people I was connected to because they were my outlet. That was my escape valve of getting away from the pain. So my brother, my friends, the neighborhood itself, I have a lot of love for it. And I cherish those memories despite a lot of pain occurring at that same time.
Okay, thank you very much. Reyna, and you said your father went to the US in 1978 and your mother followed him 2 years later, leaving you and your siblings behind. Who took care of you while you were parentless?
Yes, so when my mother and my dad left, we stayed with my father's mother at first. I wouldn't say she took care of us necessarily. She did not really want us there, you know. And to be fair, it I know it was a lot for her to take on three little kids, and she was already taking care of my cousin because my aunt had also come to the US, and so she was taking care of four grandkids, and I know it was a lot for her. But it was very difficult. It just made that separation even worse because one of my greatest fears as a child when my parents were gone was that I would never see them again. You know, that I felt abandoned. I felt unloved during those years. And my childhood was defined by that fear of being forgotten by my parents, being abandoned by them, or being replaced by US born children. Because soon after my mother came here, you know, she and my dad had another baby. And so that was very difficult for the three of us who were still in Mexico. But this is a common experience, you know, of children being left behind because their parents are forced to migrate. And it's a trauma that impacts the children. Like I feel that to this day, you know, it definitely created a distance between me and my parents. We were never quite able to overcome those years of separation, and it impacted my relationship with them.
Okay, thank you. Asale, your story documents much more than family history. It also includes explanations of the legal, social, and mental gymnastics required to maintain racism in this country. Did you find one best source or a generalized source where you could obtain historic and legal information?
So I would, yeah, I think the one best source that I could say would be librarians, because there is absolutely there was no place that I could go, couldn't, librarians are the keeper of our truths, right? Which is why I think libraries are so under attack by this current administration, but always, with budget cuts, etc. But librarians were key to the research that I did, whether it was like exploring my other grandmother was held in Japanese internment camps, and a lot of that information is found in the archives and in libraries. Trying to find out my lineage on my father's side, I turned to librarians. So whether it was in Indiana or Florida or Texas, so that's my one best source.
What a
So
great answer. Thank you. Lauren, how big is the van life movement and who's part of it? Are the van lifers temporary sojourners, or is this really a lifestyle change?
I think well, there are a few different types of van lifers. There are those that you see on social media who've, built a yoga studio on top of their van and are living in, once you look up from the price of them, I got a little angry. that these aren't vans the average person can afford. And then there are the others who, I think so many people in America have been completely priced out of the real estate market, are never going to be able to afford a house, and are surviving on gig work. I met a woman in Florida who was living in not a van, but a little Honda Civic. And she'd built a platform between on the passenger seat, just removed the back of the passenger seat so that she could sleep in her car. And she had a job doing, and so many of them do. They have really good jobs. She was a UX designer. My brother's a UX designer. I know what that pays, but everything is gig work now. So she was doing that, plus she's delivering groceries, plus she's doing Uber Eats. And she's doing it to get out of student debt that she incurred to get this job that no longer exists. And so many people I met were like that, where they had what was promised as, this is going to be a career, and you go to school and you do this and you do this and you do this. And the American dream is supposed to be, and then somehow magically you have job, family, house, white picket fence, a backyard with two dogs, and none of that exists for so many people anymore. And they're living in vans. And everywhere I went, there were people living in, and it's not necessarily the cool Sprinter vans that you see. It's the old cable trucks that are route fitted. I met a guy who's living in a U-Haul, that style box van, and he'd put skylights in the ceiling so that people couldn't tell he was living in there. Um, yeah, it's not, I think, what you see so much glamorized on social media. It's people, the new homeless in our country have jobs and they have, lives and families, but there's nowhere for them to go. So they're living in cars or vans.
Yeah, that's a serious problem. Thank you. Chris, you say the only models of success that you saw were the drug dealers who always had a lot of money. Knowing that selling drugs often results in jail time, was the risk worth the reward, or were there just no other opportunities?
Oh no, absolutely not. The risk definitely not worth the reward. But I had already been indoctrinated, and not only by my environment, but by America. Also, we, where I come from, you don't see nobody with no money unless they're a drug dealer, or you see them on TV and they're playing sports or rapping. So just like any other young black boy, I had the dream of becoming a rapper, and I didn't have the confidence and courage to pursue it all the way. I believe I had the talent. I did write a lot and I did record a lot, but I didn't have the confidence to actually supply it to the world and actually get the world's feedback and to try to make a living off of it. And so, no, is the risk is not worth the reward, but you don't see the risk as a risk. You see it as just a part of your life. Like I literally had been taught and told, I'm going to prison. This is how it's gonna be. Do this, do that, do that. And as crazy as that sounds, I want to prevent it for the next young boy and young man. But if you're gonna choose that life, you definitely need to know what you're getting yourself into. And I'm glad that the men around me, is as sad as our predicament was for them to be grooming me and prepping me for prison, it did help me and serve me while I was unwinding and reteaching myself. I was reprogramming my mind and reprogramming myself. When I got into prison, I was studious with my time, and I not only voraciously read every book I can get my hands on, but I was taking copious notes and really just trying to compare this person's outcome to this person's outcome, and how did they get here and how did they get there. And it made me realize the power of choice, and not only individual choice, but collective choice. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with America. We don't want to take into consideration our collective decisions because our culture has been programmed with this individualism and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And if you work hard enough, you would get this and get that. And nah, that we each and every single person, whether it be from the media to the production companies to the restaurants, the people that serving at the restaurants, like we have a power within our choice. And I know most people are like, well, I'm not going to take the risk on getting fired because I got to pay my bills. But if we all was to stand up, everything would change because the powers that be are really just sitting back and hoping that we continue to remain powerless and not realize the power in our decisions.
Thank you. Reyna, you said your father was ambitious for his children. He wanted you to have more and better opportunities than he had had. What else motivated you to go to college and to pursue a writing career?
Yeah, for me, it was never forgetting where I came from. Just thinking back about my childhood in Mexico. We were very, very poor. I often went around barefoot, like Chris mentioned, like no running water, no electricity. I was born in a shack made of sticks and cardboard. And so when I came here to the US, I really wanted to take advantage of the opportunities, whatever opportunities came my way, because I wanted to look back one day and to think about all the sacrifices that my family made, all the all the pain and the heartbreak that we endured, um, risking our lives to cross the border. I wanted it to mean something. I wanted it to be worth something. I wanted to look back and say it was worth it because I am here now where I am today. I am who I am and I like my life. Like that's what I wanted. And so I focused a lot, and my father definitely pushed us to get an education. He would often tell us, I brought you to this country so that you could get an education, go to college, have careers one day, be homeowners, have money for retirement. He often talked about those dreams that he had for us. And I appreciated that because my father only went to the third grade. My mother only went to the sixth grade. And so when I started junior high school, I surpassed both of my parents in their education. And when I went to college, when I went to university, I was the first in my family to set foot in a university. And so for me, it was a very lonely experience, because I had nobody to guide me. I had nobody at home that I could call and ask for advice. But but I also saw it as a big responsibility that I had to break the cycle in my family, the cycle of poverty, the cycle of lack of education. Like that was something that motivated me and that pushed me to continue going through my college experience, even though it was very difficult, and I had to I had to work in order to pay for my school. My parents were not able to support me in that way. But now, all these years later, we have a lot of our children are graduating from university. Three of my nieces have graduated from university, and now my daughter is about to graduate high school, and she's going to go to university in Ireland starting this September. And so I I broke that cycle.
Great. Thank you. Asale, you and your sister experienced physical violence at home and were abandoned by your mother at age 16. You lived in a car for a while. What happened that allowed you to transition from homeless teen to a successful writer?
Okay, well, I don't know about successful writer, but I'll take it. I'll take it right now. One of the things that's interesting to me is that the sort of overlap between all of us on this panel. And so I'll just say briefly, two things, and this connects to what Reyna was just talking about and what Chris had talked about too, in terms of thinking about dualities. And I come from this family where we didn't, dreaming wasn't even an option, which is kind of a sad and not such a nice thing. But when I told my mother at one point, because I saw some football game being played on TV, that I wanted to go to whichever, to Stanford because they were playing. And I didn't know what college football was. I knew what pro football was because of my grandfather, but who watched it. But we were always spectators, right? We were the class. I come from a class of folks who were the spectators. We are told what to do. We are used as pawns in various different ways, right? And I think that for me, what's interesting is that my mother at 16 didn't just abandon me. I mean, I'd been given up for foster care, in and out of various people's homes since before then, since the age of 4. And a lot of that had to do with the racial dynamics in our family. So when my father was incarcerated and my mother was a white woman living on her own, she didn't know what to do with us. And she was largely felt rejected by white Americans, felt like she couldn't get jobs, didn't get jobs. Also, then she went to prison. So for me, I always understood, my position, my role in my family, but also in the broader context through very anti-Black lens of this country, right? I don't know at 16 what, and I tell this story in the book, kind of a contrast, because the only person who could take me in, and Chris, you said this beautiful thing that I think we don't talk enough about, which is the fact that you were prepped, groomed for prison, right? And I think that I think that in large ways, I don't think people understand what that means when to live in a society that preps certain folks for certain places, right? My biggest fear growing up was that I would become a teenage mother, right? All my friends around me, if you weren't in prison, you were pregnant and you had babies. And when you are a young woman and you're homeless, nobody wants to take you in because you're just a womb waiting to be filled with more mouths to feed that nobody can take, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, my option was to live in a car outside the home where my sister was living, basically as a live-in maid to the family of her current boyfriend, who also worried that she would be pregnant. And anyway, to make a long story short, after that car got taken away, I had no place to go and I was on the street. And the only person who would take me in was a childhood acquaintance who was at that point becoming a neo-Nazi, right? Who was this poor 16, 17-year-old kid from the neighborhood. And I grew up in rural California. So we grew up in a very kind of, when you're poor, you live with everyone, right? Like in different parts of the country, there are sides of towns, but in California, I don't know if it's because of the housing crisis, et cetera, but everyone sort of lived in the same area. So to make a long story short, I don't know how I got out of there, but I think this question of the extreme of that forced me out because I knew I couldn't stay. It was dangerous, probably some of the scariest things I've ever experienced in my life in that moment. And I knew I couldn't stay, so I had to get out and I had to find a way to get out. And that's how no answer except for that. Sorry, I took too long.
That's okay. Thank you very much. Lauren, you said, and this is a quote, "I'm tired of blaming those with no power for all that's gone wrong with our world," end quote. In your travels, did you gain any insight into who is to blame and how to fix it?
I don't know that any of us know how to fix it. I'd love to have that answer. But unfortunately I don't. We're and it really does parallel what everyone else is saying. We're raised as we're basically being farmed as spectators, but also social media, I think, is in large part only serving to separate us all. We have, you have billionaire Sam Altman is telling us, AI is going to take all of the jobs, and we're basically going to be, their servant class for those who have everything. And we know that, and yet, you have people who never leave their towns, who don't really have much life experience, who will just happily blame who they're told to blame. And every politician plays a part in it of, it's the brown person's fault and it's the migrant's fault and they're taking all the jobs. And it's, you know, people on welfare and people who aren't contributing to society or whatever. But it's very clear that there are those who have everything and will always have everything and pass it on to their friends and their family. And those of us who are left fighting for what's left. And, Chris said it best, if we at any point would see that, there are so many more of us than there are of them. And if we would just get together and work towards that common goal of changing this system, we could. We absolutely could. But, so many of us are just happy to. I think part of the goal is they always keep us struggling and keep us trying to pay down the debt and keep us buying and keep us shopping and so exhausted that all we can do is go home and, scroll Netflix for something we don't even really enjoy watching. We're just trying to numb ourselves a little bit so we can go to sleep. But yeah, the moment we realize that we can change it, we can change it.
Okay, thank you. Chris, mandatory prison sentences seem like a really bad idea. Conditions in prisons seem to be pretty appalling, and educational opportunities for the incarcerated appear to be fairly limited. Are you working to change that?
So the answer to that is yes. But before I elaborate a little bit, I want to tell everyone I love not only the books y'all have written, even though I've only read parts of two of them. I will make sure I read the rest of them. But just listening to you all speak today, like Lauren was just saying, the fear. They keep everybody caught up in this rat race of fear that, oh, I won't be able to pay my bills, I'll get fired, or I'll go to jail, or whatever the mechanism is of fear. And then also hate. Oh, it's that person's fault. It's that group's fault. It's that group's fault. If COVID didn't teach us anything, it should have taught us that essential workers, those that are easily written off as nothing, easily disposable and expendable, are who is needed. We need certain people in certain jobs and certain activities to keep society flowing. And if people could just, like she said, stop numbing themselves, get past the pain, get past the fear, and be like, all right, if I'm gonna suffer and if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna suffer and die for a reason, for a cause. And so to answer the question about education opportunities in prison, they're not there on purpose because this is a business. This business generates, on the low end, $80 billion a year for different companies and corporations. And when most people talk about the cost of incarceration, they make it sound like that money is just evaporating, it's just disappearing in the air. No, it's going to his cousin, his friend, his brother's business. They are distributing these contracts in a way on purpose to keep enriching themselves, and they need these beds filled. So, because we need these beds filled, we need y'all to stay in this state of chaos, and to keep y'all in this state of chaos, we need certain activities to go on. And so, unfortunately, the educational opportunities are not there. Do I see them becoming available? Only once they realize how to monetize it for themselves. And so that is slowly coming about because they're putting tablets in the jails and the prisons. And on those tablets, I've actually tried to work to get some of the programming that's on the tablets. I got told no, but then a company that I actually worked with on a documentary got told yes. And so I still ended up on the tablets, but not in the way I chose, but in the way that their friend chose. And so it's unfortunately one big game that, like they said, we're pawns and rooks and knights, and we have to realize if we could just get to the other side of the board, we all can become queens and rooks and knights, and we really are what make the game. The game doesn't keep going without us, but that's why they want to keep us angry because divide and conquer. It's easier to control if I keep you divided.
Okay, we have a short time left. I'd like to ask you all to answer the question, what is the biggest thing you'd like your readers to take away from your book? And I'd like to start with Reyna.
Thank you so much for that, Chris, and everybody. It's just been such a pleasure to hear you speak, and I've been learning so much from you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is I want my reader to take is inspiration, inspiration to stand in their truth, inspiration to turn their pain into something beautiful, to know that the things that we have gone through, especially the hard things, those things have taught us lessons, they have made us resilience. And those are not things to be ashamed of, but to be proud of because we have survived and not just survived, but we're thriving. And so turn those all those negative things into positive things and make space for the joy in your life.
Thank you. Asale?
Yeah, hi. Okay, so I will keep this short or try to. Because my book tries to look at our intimate ties and how racism operates in these spaces, I really am looking at this through my family, but kind of bleeding it out to the rest of American history. The most important thing I want for folks to take away from this is that our personal histories are really tied to our collective struggle, and that the only way that we are going to be liberated is by knowing our histories, because this is not the first time we've been here. We've been here before. We've tried to have rebellions. We've had struggles, armed struggles that were collective, multiracial, that were based and rooted in class, and they've shut it down every time. There is a history there. And anyway, I won't say too much more than that. But anyway, congratulations on all your books. I can't wait to read all of them, and I wish them the very best out in the world.
Thank you. Lauren, what do you think?
Log off. They're farming us. They're farming us and they're teaching us to hate one another and separate us. And it is not accidental that social media is addictive. Log off, go meet your neighbors, meet your community, make a community, and work to change something within your community that you can. It feels way too big to change this country or change the world, but you can change something in your community and you can make it a little bit better, and those little things can grow.
Thank you. And Chris?
Lauren is right. Every single decision has power in it. And so, what I want people to take from my book is the power of choice. I want my book to be able to break stereotypes and to shift the paradigm for people to realize whether I'm just saying good morning, good afternoon, how are you doing today? Are you hungry? Can I give you a ride? Simple things like that, too, as she also, Asale mentioned, we've had armed struggles. And I'm not telling nobody to crash out and risk their lives. What I am telling people is to know that other people have risked their lives for us to be in a position that it would be better than what they had to experience. And since it is to some norms and some extent, don't take it for granted. Appreciate it, be grateful of it, and to keep trying to build on it. And let's change everything because the time is now. If it's ever been a time, it's now, because people are realizing the ultimate truth, that it's no reason that 100 people in the world basically control everything and the other people are breaking their backs and not having anything. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. So we have to be that change. And if that small change is merely saying good morning, that's good. If that small change is reading a book, that's good. And if that small change is saying, hey, I've had enough, I'm not going to do what they said do. I'm going to do this because I read Chris's book, I read Lauren's book, I read Asale's book, I read Reyna's book, and they was able to endure, not only endure, but take that pain and let it be the mechanism for change to get to something great.
Thank you. And thank you all. It's been very inspirational, and I really appreciate your ability to share your stories with us. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll now have a short break, so if you haven't already, please explore the exhibit hall, and we'll meet you back here in 30 minutes.